Welcome everyone to another week of All Things Food with Cheryl and Barry here at our fabulous Durham County Center of the Extension of North Carolina State Extension. And this week we're gonna, just like every week, we're gonna talk about a weird fruit or vegetable that I found for you. And then we're gonna open it up to questions about this fruit or vegetable. We also have a really interesting chili of the week. So the vegetable or fruit of the week is a persimmon. So this one happens to be an Asian persimmon, and Asian persimmons, of course, are not native to North Carolina, but there are quite a few varieties of persimmons that are native to North America. And they were sort of a survival food for not just the fauna of this area, but also the settlers and Native Americans, indigenous tribes have been eating persimmons, the native persimmons, for thousands of years. In fact, they found evidence that mammoths actually would go through, eat tons of these, and then spread the seeds all over North America. Primarily the Mississippi River east, for the most part, is where they grow. So let's talk a little bit about the persimmon. So this is a variety of persimmon that is hard and unripe, and you can actually eat it when it is hard and unripe. You can't do that with all kinds of persimmons. This same persimmon, this Asian persimmon, here's how to eat it ripe. You wait until it gets super soft, and you can actually cut the calyx off the top. This is the calyx right there. Cut it off the top and then spoon it out like a dessert. So these are super delicious when they're really soft. And if you get one of the non-astringent varieties, you can eat them when they're hard or when they're soft. So not all varieties are non-astringent. So as you know, I'm a visual learner. So astringency equals tannins. So astringency is like at least in the context of food, shows you that there's tannic acid in the food. And the word tannin comes from tanner, as in like tanning hides, because to tan hides, a lot of times the tanners would use extracts of oak tannins to turn a hide a different color. And so these are very sort of like tacky feeling, a little bit sour and bitter sometimes, and they make your mouth feel awful. So not this variety. This is a non-astringent variety called a Fuyu persimmon. But some of the other varieties, like the native varieties, are all astringent persimmons, and you can only eat them when they're super, super, super soft. So how it works is you would pick your astringent persimmons and set them on a countertop and let them ripen until they're like softer than a ripe avocado. And then they're like the most delicious, wonderful treat. But if you bite into, excuse me, an unripe astringent persimmon, it's awful. It may turn you off of persimmons for the rest of your life. You bite into it and it's like it coats your mouth and sucks all the moisture out of your mouth. It's the weirdest sensation. If you wanted to mimic this sensation and not buy a persimmon, you could get a perfectly green, unripe banana and break into that and take a big old bite of it, and you'll see exactly what I mean. It won't hurt you at all, but it just tastes terrible. And I actually, the first time I had a persimmon, probably in my teenage years, I bit right into it, and it was an astringent variety, and I thought they were awful until I got older and learned more about edible horticulture, and that I just didn't know that I had to wait for it to be totally ripe. So these trees grow really well here, and you can see that because I just picked this morning from our orchard at Briggs. And these are wonderful to grow here because they're so easy, just the easiest thing. There aren't many diseases or insects that attack these. They have a beautiful green leaf with sort of a brownish undertone on the underside. And then in the late fall, early winter, when the leaves die off, and because it's a deciduous tree, which means it's not evergreen, it'll drop its leaves and regrow them every spring. They turn sometimes, depending on the variety of tree, will turn this like beautiful red color. Some of them get kind of a bluish gray hue. It's just a gorgeous tree to have in the landscape. So people will often come to me and ask, about growing fruit trees on their land, either in their yard, or if they have sort of larger land holdings of 10 acres or more, and they don't want to spray ever. So they'll come and say, oh, I want to grow some peaches and plums, but I want to grow them organically, or cherries, but I don't want to use any kind of spray. And so I say, well, then don't grow those kind of stone fruits, because you have to spray them, whether with organic listed chemicals or not. It's very difficult to grow a good stone fruit, a peach, a plum, a pluot, a cherry, almonds. Like those are very difficult to grow here if you don't spray them all the time, because they have to ripen on the tree and everything wants to eat them. There's going to be fungi that wants to eat the tree. There's going to be every type of insect that wants to come and destroy the fruit. And you just have to be on top of the tree to get any viable fruit off of it. But this guy, you pretty much don't have to do anything except for test your soil, pick the right rootstock, and throw it in, and then harvest. You can start, depending on the variety, you can start harvesting probably in September, October, and all the way through. There's some that even stay on the tree and are really beautiful to harvest in December and January. So it's really interesting in the cold months also to see fruit on a tree. It's kind of nice. Also, if you're growing other fruit trees and they come ripe in the summer and early fall, this is nice to have because it ripens so much later, and so you have more continual fruit through the season. But this is not the native variety. Often if you are riding on the tobacco trail, and I tried so hard to get you a native persimmon today, native persimmons are much, much smaller. They're about the size of a golf ball. Some of the varieties will grow on apple. And those are native all over the United States. So those trees are really easy to grow. They basically grow wild all over the place. You can see them on the tobacco trail and pick some of them. Just make sure that they're super, super soft before you eat them, because otherwise you'll have that astringency experience that will not be enjoyable. This variety happens to be seedless. So it doesn't have any seeds inside of it because it has perfect flowers, with a flower of perfect flowers, where it has male and female parts of that flower. There are other varieties that you have to have a male and a female to cross. There's a tree that has, all male flowers, and then a tree that has all female flowers. And you need both of the trees in the environment in order for them to pollinate and make fruit. Because if you just have one or the other, you won't get any fruit. So, the native varieties are super easy to grow, but they get 50 or 60 feet tall. Along the Mississippi River, they get to about 100 feet tall. So, and plus the fruit is smaller. You have to wait till it's totally ripe, and it usually has a lot of seeds. So there's a lot of work to get to the food. Whereas this is just so much easier. You get fewer of them. The tree is smaller, but you can actually end up with some non-astringent seedless fruit, which is really wonderful. But I do want to talk to you about, if you wanted to cultivate this tree in your yard, about what type of tree to select. So because these are all related, whether they're the native persimmons, or whether they are the Asian persimmons, they are all related to an ebony tree. They're in the ebony tree family. And this is evident when one of these trees is over 100 years old. It will develop a heartwood that's deep black. So, and that's very similar to the ebony trees. If anybody's ever seen an ebony wood desk or a railing or something, the wood is gorgeous, very, very hard, and just this gorgeous deep black grain of wood. That's why it's so expensive, is because it's a little more rare. and the tree has to be pretty large to get that wood. But these guys are related to ebony. In order to get the most successful crop of these kinds of Asian persimmons in North Carolina, you have to grow them on native rootstock. So let me explain that concept a little bit by talking about, let's say, apples. Okay, so if anybody can think about what a Fuji apple tastes like, Fuji apples grow all over the United States in places that get a little chilly in the winter time because they need chill hours, which we can talk about that on another webinar. But the Fuji apple that you're eating is a clone of every other Fuji apple tree out there. But the part that's the clone is the top part called the scion. But the trees that grow those apples grow all over the United States. And in different areas of the United States, we have different kinds of soils. And so a tree that would grow well in Northern California is not going to grow very well in our clay soils of North Carolina. So what they do is put them on rootstocks that grow well in the soil. So this is the rootstock of the plant, and this is the scion of the plant. And how they do that, how propagators do that, is they grow an apple tree that grows really, really well in the soil here, but maybe the apples don't taste very good. And it's just, this is like a full-size tree. They do this on like little twigs, basically. So that little tiny tree that grows really good in our soils will be clipped off on the top, cut down the middle, and a clone of that Fuji apple, it'll just be a little stick. They'll tie it in almost like a transplant, and then they wrap it with wax. And then now you've got a tree that's going to grow great in the kind of soil by where you live. And this one gives you the kind of fruit that you want and you're looking for. So you get this beautiful tree that's going to last a really long time and be successful in your environment. Well, the same thing goes for Asian persimmons. If you're going to buy an Asian persimmon tree, ask them what rootstock it's on. So the rootstock that does well here is the Virginiana rootstock, because that's the native rootstock. You're not going to be tested on this information. Just know that if you are going to plant trees, don't just go down to your local big box hardware store and buy whatever tree is there and throw it in the ground. It's better to investigate what types of rootstocks the tree is on, because that's also not only going to determine how well the tree grows in our soil, but it's also going to determine how tall the tree gets, if it's resistant to certain kinds of diseases, things like that. Like they have rootstocks that are dwarfing rootstocks. So, you know, this grows well in our soil. Maybe there's 4 or 5 different kinds of rootstocks that grow well in our soil. And when I put my apple tree on top of it, depending on what kind of rootstock it is, my tree might only get 15 feet tall, or it might get 45 feet tall. And a 45-foot tall fruit tree is difficult because nobody wants to get up in a ladder and with a fruit picker. It's much better, especially in home gardens and orchards, that the trees stay pretty small so that you don't have to get on a ladder to pick the fruit. Because you're not really going to be able to harvest fruit until the 4th or 5th year, it's an investment in your time and energy and patience to grow a fruit tree. So you want something, you know, think about 20, 30 years down the line. I think about this when I'm older. One day when I'm a little old lady, I just want to walk around in my front yard and only have the fruit no taller than how far I can reach up. So these are things to consider with rootstocks. And if you have any questions about this, you can always contact me here at the Extension office because I'm my new professional development and getting paid for my hobbies is learning all about fruit trees, and especially fruit trees for the home landscape more than anything. You can have a small front yard and have a very productive fruit tree that doesn't get very tall if you choose the right rootstock, know how to grow it, and make sure that you choose for disease resistance. So let's talk a little bit about how to cook this bad boy. So you can eat, of course, this particular kind fresh, you know, both in its unripe and its ripe state. When it's like this is great to to grate or chop up and put in salads. You can saute this in a little bit of butter with like a little bit of cinnamon and nutmeg. My husband calls these plumpkins because they look like a pumpkin, but they have the consistency of a plum when they're a little bit less ripe than this one. So I thought that was kind of cute. So they can be really juicy and soft. And this one's great to make like persimmon butter out of, or drinks or ice cream or something like that, or like a gelato. Just know that anything this fibrous that you make a frozen dessert out of takes longer to freeze. So make sure that you have a lot of ice and salt for your ice cream maker if you're going to do this. Not that people are making too much ice cream when these are ripe in November, but it's an option. These are fantastic in smoothies. You can also, when they're this ripe, you can use the pulp in any of the recipes that you would use bananas in. So like banana bread, banana cake, things like that. Not really banana cream pie, but you know, those kinds of banana flavors. There's also persimmon cakes that kind of look like like little brownies. The native Virginiana varieties, actually, you can cook these down and make molasses out of them. It's a real dark, super sweet product. And then this guy, one thing I want to tell you about though, about unripe persimmons, whether they're astringent or non-astringent, when they're really hard like this, don't eat too many of them. If you have a high fiber diet and you eat a lot of fiber frequently, there's a lot of times people won't have problems with them, but there is a well-known medical condition. You know, I'm never wanting to scare you away from eating any of these beautiful foods that I present, but if there is a risk, like we've spoke about some other foods that you can't combine with certain medications, this guy, if you eat a bunch of these and you're not used to them, there are some people who can develop bezoars. And the one in particular, if you eat, you know, the first time you taste this, you think it tastes great, and you eat 10 or 12 of these in one sitting, you can develop a Diospiro bezoar. And this Diospiro, this is the plant name of a persimmon. So, and they're specific. These, sometimes people get them from like eating a whole pineapple that isn't totally ripe, and that falls in the same class as this one. This bezoar is just a blockage in your intestines, and this could be from all different kinds of things, but there's one medically in like, you know, treatment manuals that are specifically related to persimmons, and usually they'll find them happening in children in areas where like persimmon farms or large persimmon growing areas, especially where there's not a lot of other food. These come out and kids will gorge themselves on them, and the tannins in them will actually react in their stomach and create this like gooey, schmooey blockage. Also interesting though, is that there's research on treatment with Coca-Cola or other cola beverages that can actually break these up in your digestion, so that you wouldn't have to have surgery or, you know, an endoscopy or, you know. So I don't want to scare you away from this because these are beautiful. Eat 1 or 2 of them. Just don't sit down and eat 12 of them if they're like this. Now, once they get this soft, that doesn't happen because the tannins in this guy are all gone. The tannins have totally broken down in this one, and so you can't get those bezoars from that. Okay, that's persimmons. Real quick, let's do the chili of the week. Okay, this guy is a really rare one, and it's called the 7-pot bubblegum. And it was developed by a gentleman named John Harper in the United Kingdom. I mean, you really wouldn't think that England would have people developing chilies, but there's a long history there of conservatories of plants where people have bred plants and, you know, brought plants, especially when they were in their imperial days, you know, conquering the world. They were bringing in a lot of plant material, different kinds of plants to propagate in these big glass houses where they could create, even though in the UK, they don't have a tropical environment. They brought in a lot of plants from around the world that required a tropical or a subtropical environment, and they would heat these buildings and you'll see some of the old conservatories, even some of the current ones, and they're these gorgeous glass houses. So like very intricate and beautiful. And so this gentleman, John Harper, I'm telling you, his seeds are all over the place, certain kinds of seeds that he does, these individual crosses of these very hot peppers, but I can't find him anywhere. I'm tempted to call up one of the companies that sells his seeds and figure out how to get a hold of this guy, because I can't find him. And I would love, I love plant nerds. And so he specializes in very hot peppers. This is too hot for me to eat, but people who are used to eating this can pop one of these in their mouth and they think it tastes a little bit like bubble gum. I thought they called it a 7-Pot bubble gum because it looks like a chewed up piece of bubble gum, but I was wrong. So one thing that this particular pepper that this gentleman, John Harper, developed is this has a bleeding effect. So if you look, most of the time, this is a calyx, and this is the stem. Normally, no matter what pepper you pick up, this stays green no matter what the pepper color turns. But this one has this effect of bleeding the pigment up the stem when it's really, really ripe. So I thought that was really interesting. But these are very hot, so handle with gloves, definitely, and don't touch your eyes because these guys are super, super hot. But yeah, so that's the 7-Pot bubblegum pepper. So we have a few minutes for questions if anybody would like to ask some questions about either one of these plants or anything about gardening or food.
Awesome. So I'm opening it back up to questions. Just to start about the persimmon, we're wondering, could you freeze those? I also remember having a persimmon tree in my yard when I was a little girl and having a lot of them, and we had the little ones, and they usually just all rotted. So just kind of wondering about like other ways to preserve them and take care of them.
Well, in the case of having a native one like you did, what I would probably do is let them get totally ripe. And then there's a very thin skin on these, but what you can do is once it's really, really ripe, ooh, this one's a big one, the little ones that she's talking about, I would pop this, I would like push it so that all the pulp would come out into a strainer over a bowl. And then I would whisk the strainer so that all of the pulp would go out into the bowl, and then that keeps the seeds and most of the skin up into the strainer, and then you can just freeze the pulp. So that's really the easiest way to do that, because if you don't want to do canning or anything, that would be the way to do it. But I probably wouldn't freeze them whole, just because, well, you could freeze them whole. It's just that you're going to have to do the processing either on the front end or the back end. So yeah, either way, but you can cook them into syrups. You can do all kinds of things. You can acidify the syrups and can the syrups, things like that. But if you were looking to freeze it, that's how I would do it.
Awesome. Thank you. We have a question coming in on Facebook that is, what is the best way to protect your plants year round?
Depends on where you live. And it depends on, so usually you don't have to protect plants unless you're trying to grow them in the wrong place at the wrong time. So like in the case of, let's say, cabbages or anything in the cabbage family, cabbage, kohlrabi, broccoli, cauliflower. If you're growing it in a cool season, that's when that plant is supposed to grow. With 6 hours of sunlight, you can create, and this is the season for those type of plants. You put them in at the right time and you're good to go. But if you plant them a little bit too early when it's still hot out, or you plant them late in the spring and it starts to get warm, there'll be this cute little yellow-white butterfly. It's a moth flying around, and people think, oh, how beautiful, look at that butterfly. No, you capture that thing and you kill it, because it's gonna lay eggs on those plants, and then you'll get a cabbage looper. So this little guy, it's really bad with cabbages, because the little worm will get in there and eat a loop through the cabbage, and then the whole cabbage rots. So in order to protect your plant at that time, if you're trying to lengthen your season, you cover the entire bed. So you can go to like a big hardware store, go to the plumbing section and get this like kind of pliable PVC and they're like $2.50. They're cheap, 4 or 5 of them on like a 10-foot bed, and then cover it in not landscape fabric, sorry. There's like a floating row cover that you can get. They're a little pricey to buy at first, but they last for years and years and years and years if you take care of them. And you can just leave those hoops on your bed all year round, and that'll give you the option to throw a row cover over it if you want to protect something from frost. You can throw a shade cover over it to protect it from the sun if you're trying not to like sun scald something. It's all about kind of lengthening your seasons one way or another based on what you want to do. I just don't really like to use plastic because it could really heat up underneath it unless you're trying to create like a greenhouse effect. Like, you know, in December, if you decide you want to go ahead and grow some potatoes, you know, by all means use plastic. But if I'm talking about edible plants, that's how I would do it. Container gardens, like, you know, if you wanted to, okay, let's say you want to grow this chili, but you want it to last 2 or 3 years rather than just the 1 year. This is not frost tolerant. So you can, you know, grow this guy in the ground, pull up the plant, put it in a pot, bring it inside for the winter. People do this all the time. And then you bring it, it kind of limps along in the winter. It may not give you any fruit. It's not happy, but then you put it back outside again in the summertime and it's happy as a clam. So, you know, it really is pertaining to what plant you're talking about, but you know, it's more about lengthening seasons, I think.
That's very interesting. I'm glad Mr. Wilson asked that question because I actually just noticed that my kale has a lot of little holes in it this morning. And we did see such a moth going around our thing. So it sounds like I have the issue that Mr. Wilson was raising. What would you do to treat it?
So, well, there's a couple things you can do. So if you don't have an organic garden, you can use products like 7. I don't know what the chemical name of it is. But what we use at our garden is Bacillus thuringiensis, BT. It's like you can spray it in a liquid. There's a powder called Dipel. I'm not promoting any particular brand. The BT works, you know, it's good in lots of different products. It's the same thing. It's a bacteria that's harmless to humans, but disrupts the digestive system of chewing pests. So not sucking pests though, like a true bug with a little proboscis that sucks the juice out of a plant, it's not going to do anything to it. But anything that's munching, if it's a bug that munches, a caterpillar, whatnot, that's the best way to do it. And there's lots of ways to apply it. Some people put it in like a little pantyhose, like the powder, and just shake it on the plant. For like $3 or $4 online, you can order like a little puffer. It's like a bellows puffer. And that should just be part of your kit. That and diatomaceous earth. And then, believe it or not, a butterfly net. So you can capture them, because if you capture them, they won't lay any eggs.
Thank you. I'm really excited that question was asked. So we actually have some people here that could unmute themselves in our audience. If they'd like to ask a question live, I'd be happy to unmute you. All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I guess we are out of questions today and out of time as well, Sherilyn.
Well, thank you everyone for coming to our new time at 1 p.m. And I look forward to going to the produce department to look for new and interesting things for you next week. Oh, and those little butterflies that are flying around trying to lay eggs on everything, in another few weeks when we get a cold snap, they won't be around anymore. They go dormant, so you'll be good to go. You won't have to worry about it, and your kales will grow gorgeously all winter long, especially if you put a row cover on them when it freezes.
Awesome. Thank you. It's wonderful to have all this advice from you. Thanks so much, Sherilyn.
See you next week, everybody.